Welcome to the Kitchen Fun, and today we have another project, and we're doing something that I've actually only done one time before, and that is to make Kraut burgers. Now, I was at a meeting with some other folks recently, and the topic of Kraut burgers came up, and everyone was talking about them as if they knew what they were. And at a certain point, I just had to raise my hand and I said, what's a Kraut burger? And finally it was explained to me that it's basically kind of what it sounds like in a way. It's hamburger and cabbage and onions that's cooked together and then wrapped in dough and then baked. And I was really intrigued by it. So I went home, I got online, I looked up some recipes, and I thought, you know, I've made things like this before, and this sounds really interesting. The only thing I'm missing is I don't have any cabbage. So I ran to the store and I got some cabbage, and I tried my hand at making Kraut burgers, and they turned out okay. They turned out pretty good. I think, I still don't have anything to compare them to, because I haven't sampled anybody else's, but to me, like, they were fine. But I also felt they could use just a little more depth of flavor, right? Like, I mean, it was good, and maybe I had done something wrong, I don't know. But I thought there's a little bit more we could do with this and still kind of keep it in the vein of what it is. So that's what we're gonna try today. We're gonna do kind of a take on a Kraut burger that actually brings some New Mexico influence into something that is otherwise very sort of Northern and Eastern European. So we get this mix of cultures. It should be great. Now, we're gonna start with a dough. When I made it before, I actually just used kind of a standard pretzel dough, something I use a lot for things like that. And that's, it's a good kind of basic dough. It's got a lot of structure to it. You can use it for things like making pockets and putting stuff in it, and it'll hold together. But I found myself wanting something a little bit different. I wanted a little more moisture in it. I wanted a little different crumb. You know, it just wasn't quite right for what it was going with. So I went around and found a different recipe for a different kind of dough that we're going to try using this time. The beginnings of this dough recipe is actually more for things like dinner rolls. So it's got a lot more fat in it than what you would generally find in like the pretzel dough that I used before. So let's take a look at the ingredients for today's dough. All right, so of course we've got our flour, gotta have that. We've got some sugar we're gonna be using, and of course our old friend salt from our salt pinch. We have some instant rise, or what's sometimes called bread machine yeast, an egg, some butter, and finally some milk, and of course our recipe on the iPad, and the all-important coffee. All right, let's make some dough. So we're gonna start off with about 4-ish cups of flour. And then we're gonna add to that 1/3 of a cup of sugar. Then a full teaspoon of salt. And then 2 tablespoons of our rapid dry yeast. Now, you may be wondering, if you've seen it in the store, you'll find kind of active yeast, and then you'll find the rapid rise, oftentimes called bread machine yeast. They are actually the same thing. The difference is in the rapid rise, the granules of yeast are actually much more fine, so they don't require that proofing step of being put into water to let them, you know, start doing their yeastiness. They can just go straight in, and it just makes it a little bit more convenient. But they are exactly the same thing. They're made in the same factory in the same way. It's just the rapid rise yeast is ground a lot smaller. All right, we're gonna take our dry ingredients and we're gonna mix those up together just to get them started. And just do that with a whisk. And then we're gonna add our wet ingredient. And in this case, we're just using milk. This is 1% milk. But we need those yeast to start doing their job. And in order to do their job, they need two things. They need moisture, which we're gonna get in the milk. And they also need heat, or at least a little bit more than room temperature. So first thing we're gonna do is actually throw this in the microwave and get it to be about 110 degrees. All right, so we got our milk here. Just came out of the microwave, about 75 seconds. Again, we want it about 110 to 120 degrees, so we'll use our rapid temperature gauge here just to make sure. Kind of give a little stir. Yeah, we just need to be right about in that zone, so in it goes. So now we got to put on our dough hook. I do love my KitchenAid. We have been together for about 20 years, and all sorts of amazing things have come out of it. But it is a godsend when it comes to doing things like this. So we got the bowl locked in, we got the head locked down. We're gonna start off nice and slow, patient, give it a little time, let it just kind of start incorporating all that stuff. You may kind of smack it, get the flour out of there, start incorporating all of that. Now, if you're paying attention, you may have noticed a couple of things, and that's, I forgot a couple of things. I showed you that there were butter and egg that were gonna go in there, but we haven't put it in there yet, and that's true, we haven't. I wanted it to knead, spend some time kneading as it is, because I want the water and the flour to come together and start forming gluten, which is a protein. And so gluten is really what gives bread or any kind of dough its kind of stickiness. It's what turns it from kind of glop into something like bread that actually holds together. It gives you kind of a structure to it. And if you just put the fat in the dough, if you put the fat in the dough early, like right at the beginning, that fat's gonna coat the flour, and it's gonna be harder for the water to get in, and it's gonna get harder for the gluten to form. So I want a little bit of structure. I want the moisture that comes from the fat, but I also want the bread to still have some structure so that it holds together, especially since it's gonna have a really kind of moist filling in it. So that's why I kneaded it for a little while first without any of the fat to get the bread and the flour and the water all doing their thing, get those gluten chains forming, and now we're gonna go ahead and add in our additional fats, and that will kind of help finish out the dough. All right, so next up, add the egg. In the trash. And then our slightly melty butter. That may be a little more melty than I wanted it to be, but that's okay. There is grace. All right, all of that goes in there, and we keep on mixing. Yeah, you can tell this dough's really got some fats in it now, which is good. So I didn't add all of the flour in the beginning that the recipe calls for, and that was on purpose, because it's always a little imprecise how much flour you actually need. So we're gonna let this mix for a little while, and then we're just gonna slowly incorporate some additional flour until the dough gets to the point where it starts to feel not super wet. We want a slightly dry dough. All right, so we have now combined all of our ingredients. We let the dough knead for a while, and that kneading is also what helps build up the gluten. So even though it was already all like combined and the ingredients were all there and it's about the right level of stickiness, just let it go for a few minutes just to really let it knead and build those gluten protein strains up. So now I think we're ready to transfer it to a bowl to let it rise. To let it rise, we're gonna transfer it over to this wooden bowl that we're first gonna coat the outside of with a little bit of olive oil. You don't need a lot, but basically wanna just help the dough to avoid sticking too much. So you put that in there, and then this is really fun. This is, you know, sometimes in cooking, there's things that just bring you joy. And I don't know why, but coating a bowl with olive oil is just one of those things that brings you joy. I don't know. All right, so we're gonna take it out of here. You can just use a rubber scraper, or, you know, make sure your hands are clean. Just get in there, use your hands, it's fine. Throw it on top. It's a little sticky, not too bad. Make sure I got all that good dough out of there. All right. Now, we're gonna wanna cover this and let it rise somewhere preferably a little bit warm. Now, you can just throw a towel over it, or you can wrap it in like saran wrap or press and seal or whatever. If you're gonna use a towel, which is great because there's less waste that way, you need to get it wet first. And the reason you get it wet is then that forms a better seal. If you just lay it on there's a lot of ways for air to get through. If you get your towel wet first, it's gonna make a better seal around the edge, and the water is gonna fill in all the little tiny microscopic holes in the towel fabric itself, because you want a good seal. So always get your towel wet, throw it over the top, and let it rise. It's even better if you can use hot water, because again, we want the dough to rise, and heat helps the yeast out. So a hot water towel, like going to a nice spa, is the best thing for your bread dough. Okay, so we're gonna set that aside, and then I guess we're gonna clean up while this is doing its thing, and then we'll come back and start working for the filling we're gonna stick inside this hopefully really good dough. All right, it's been about an hour and a half. Our dough is rising, and it's time to start working on the filling for our Kraut burgers. I've got a pan on the stove, just kind of low temp, starting to get it kind of pre-warmed, because we're gonna brown the hamburger in there. And then we're gonna add our vegetables. Now, standard fare, from what I can tell in this kind of thing, is some cabbage and some onion. And this kind of gives us some hints about where this came from. I really kind of can imagine this being like a late or mid-winter kind of dish that you make, where, you know, you're down to kind of the vegetables that will keep for a long time down in your cellar. I mean, this whole thing just sort of screams, you know, grandma's recipe from the old country, right? And I get it, and it's pretty cool, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna take like a high value item, hamburger in this case, but you know, meat, and we're gonna stretch it a lot actually by combining it and cooking it with some kind of low value items like the cabbage and the onion. So when we cook the hamburger, we're not gonna drain it, we're just gonna add these and allow it all to kind of cook together. So the onion and the cabbage are going to take on all the fat and the flavor from the hamburger, so you're not wasting any of that, and you're going to get something that is a lot more than just, say, you know, hamburger alone. Now, when I made these before, I did notice, like, they were okay, like they were good. One of the recipes actually I looked at says, you know, add some actual like sauerkraut to it, and I did that, and that gave it a little extra flavor. You know, a good generous amount of salt and pepper kind of really helps it out. But I'd like another kind of level to the flavor. Like, I think it'd be great if there was just a little bit more in there that could just kind of take it up a notch. But I want to stay in the vein, right? Now, some people will add cheese or, you know, things like that. You can do that, but cheese is another kind of high value, high dollar item. And I want to kind of stick with this idea of, you know, a small amount of the high dollar item and then a bunch of other stuff getting added in. So we're going to kind of change regions of the world and go from kind of northern Eastern European kind of things to more like South or Central American sort of things, and bring something new to the party. And the thing we're going to bring is green chilies. Now, this lovely package right here are some fresh, or they were fresh, fire roasted green chilies that I picked up at a local grocery store. They were doing it in their parking lot. This is, oh gosh, a little under probably a pound that they've been, for the most part, had their peels removed and their caps removed and all of that. And then I vacuum sealed them and threw them in the freezer, and they've been in the freezer for a little while, but thawed it out. And so we're gonna add that to the mix with the onions and the cabbage in order to really kind of add a new flavor. Now, these are medium hot. They're not hot, but they will bring a little bit of heat to it, and that'll be fun. All right, so we already got to use my KitchenAid, which I love to death, and now I get to use my my blender, or not blender. It's not a blender. It's not a blender. What is this? This is a food processor. That's what this is. We get to use my food processor, again, to process all of this stuff. One, because I'm lazy, and two, my knife skills aren't really all that great. So I've got a tool, and I'm gonna use my tool, and then I'm gonna throw it in my dishwasher, and it's gonna make my life so much easier. Now, what I wanna use for my cabbage is actually not the standard knife blade that is in here. We're gonna actually take that out for now. And instead we're going to use one of these discs. Now, this kind of attaches to the stem on there. It's going to rotate, as you can see, and then it's got this slicing disc that we're going to use. That's going to basically shred the cabbage. This is how I would do it if I were making coleslaw out of it, and I want kind of those stringy bits of cabbage rather than, you know, a bunch of little bits of cabbage. So we're going to take our cabbage here. Cut it in half, cut it in half again, kind of take that hard center part out that we don't want, and with any luck, this will be just about the right size to go in there. So this is plugged in, all on. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it on, though it's not gonna run, it's got a safety feature in it. Feed that into our little hopper here, and then let the magic happen. That is so satisfying. I mean, oh my gosh. Like, I could just, all day. I could do it all day. Boom! Something that would take me minutes, I tell you. We get done with in just literally a matter of seconds. All right, we're gonna go and do one more. All right, I think that's probably about all I'm gonna need. So we're gonna stop there. I'll put that away for something else. And then we will empty it out. You can see kind of long and stringy and all that kind of stuff. So we're gonna dump that right in there. Perfect. All right, now we're gonna do the same thing. Gotta put that in there. We're doing the same thing to the onion. I could put this blade in there and just get like really finely chopped onions if I wanted to. That's not really what I want. I kind of want it to match what's going on with the cabbage there. So we will slice it up, remove all this peel that we don't want in there. Man, magic. All right. So there is my onion all kind of sliced up and ready to go. All right, so last but certainly not least are going to be our green chilies. Now for the green chilies, I am going to go ahead and reinstall my blade there. Open up my package. Just dump those right in there. I'm going to take those juice because there's flavor. There's flavor in that juice, and we want that. All the flavor we can get. That will go on, and then in this case, we're just going to use a pulse. We're going to pulse it a couple of times. It's important to pulse it because what's going to happen is it's going to cut bits really fine, and the bigger chunks are going to float on top. So when you stop momentarily, that's going to let the bigger pieces kind of fall down by the blade and let them get chopped up. Otherwise, if you just hold it down, you're going to get really, really fine stuff at the bottom and big chunks at the top, and that just doesn't work. So a couple pulses. So I have my pan out on my stove. Again, I've been kind of warming it over kind of medium-low for a little bit, and then I turn it up to medium and just kind of giving it a minute to come up to temp. And so we're gonna start by adding in our oil for frying. In this case, I'm gonna use some avocado oil. Avocado is a great oil for this kind of thing because it's a high smoke point oil, meaning that it doesn't kind of burn or go all smoky on you until a much higher temperature as opposed to like olive oil. So we want to get that warmed up. That'll be good. All right, and then the next step is a hamburger. Now I've got just basically a pound of hamburger here. Kind of crumble it up. Yep, it should sizzle when it hits the pan, and it does. And then use my thing here. All right, so I got that pretty much mostly all browned, as you can tell. The fat's kind of running a little bit. In some recipes, you may drain that off now, the fat, but I'm not gonna do that this time. I'm gonna just go ahead and add my vegetables to it and let it cook in there and kind of soak up all that goodness. Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. That may be a little more than I expected it to be. But all right, so it's been about half an hour. I got my oven all preheated, and this has been kind of cooking away. I threw some salt, some pepper, and a little bit of garlic in there. Okay, not a little bit, quite a bit of garlic, because of course, garlic. Let's see how we did. Ooh. Yeah, smells like cabbage. But you can see it's cooked down a ton. I mean, just a ton. So time to put it all together. I've got my cookie sheets lined with parchment paper, everybody's best friend. We got our dough here, we got our filling here, got my rolling pin, a little bit of flour to flour my surface, and we're just gonna go to town here. All right, so that's our first tray of 6 done. What I kind of discovered is this dough just isn't as resilient as the one I used before, which makes sense. I mean, it's got a lot more fat content in it and everything, and it's just not gonna be as strong, because that's actually what I wanted. I wanted a softer, fluffier thing. So I couldn't manhandle it as much as I had before. As you can see, it kind of got thin, and this one kind of exploded a little bit. So when I kind of changed up my technique, wasn't kind of pushing on it as hard, hard, that seemed to work out. Batch number 1 is in the oven. Here is batch number 2. Now, last time I made these, I actually took them at this stage, not cooked yet, as far as not baked yet, and just put this whole tray in the freezer for about an hour, and then came back and individually wrapped them and just stored them in the freezer for a couple of weeks, actually, and then just took them straight out of the freezer and tried baking them, and that actually worked out pretty well. Or you could freeze them when they're all done and baked, and treat them almost kind of like a homemade Hot Pocket. And then just microwave those for maybe like a minute and a half. And then you have a fresh lunch wherever you are. So after 12 minutes, 375 on convect, this is what you get. Nice and golden brown. This has been out of the oven for a little while, kind of let it cool a bit. Smells, whew. Smells amazing. You know, I can smell out of the garlic, surprisingly, and the bread, obviously, but I can't wait to cut into it and see how we did. So let's take a look inside. Now, I remember so we were kind of after a softer, kind of flakier dough or crust on it, and I definitely have that. It's not nearly as hard as it was. I can feel that it's a lot lighter and squishier than the last time I made it, so that's good. The smell is great, and again, we got that nice golden brown on top, so I'd say on all those things, that's very successful. Let's see how it tastes. Oh, wow. So up front, you get a lot of the onion and the cabbage and the kind of things you would expect. Like the meaty flavors in there, the meaty flavors throughout, which is great because you basically take this small amount of beef and spread it over, 12 of these things. So it's like 1/12 of a pound of hamburger in there, but you can taste the meatiness throughout the whole thing, which I guess is kind of the point. Up front, you really get the cabbage and the onion, and then the pepper, garlic, right there. And then the green chilies are there, but they kind of lag behind, and the heat really comes last. So it's definitely a lot more interesting experience, and definitely a lot more, there's a lot more layers to it than last time. So all in all, I'm gonna call that a success. That's probably the way that I would make those. And who knew that Northern and Eastern Europe could play so well with Central America, but it turns out they can. All right, well, thank you for joining us for this little bit of fun on The Kitchen Fun, and I look forward to seeing you next time.